All right, greetings and welcome to yet another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by Graham Doran. Graham, how we doing? We just got back. Well, you just got back from Disney World. We didn't go there together or anything, but what was the number one highlight of that trip?
The kid was just super excited about everything that we did. So if I said that a ride was cool, he said no, it was awesome. And so I just really appreciated the positive attitude.
Did he like did he decide that one of the rides was your favorite? Because our daughter is like convinced that we love the Winnie the Pooh ride because she loved it so much.
He didn't have that kind of attitude, but he definitely teased me a little bit about basketball. So, Dad, if we don't go on this ride, you can't watch any more basketball.
That's harsh. All right, enough Disney talk. Well, kind of. I guess we're still sort of talking ESPN, but we're gonna talk per usual one seeds, bubble. You said what was your one prompt, your favorite part of the bracket? We'll get into that. We'll talk some of the best games coming up this weekend, but got to start at the top. One seeds, who's there now, and you wanted to discuss who's like the farthest team down on the seed list that you could actually see still getting there. So I'm sure we'll agree on who the ones are. Maybe we'll differ on the order of them, though. We'll see.
Yeah, I think Auburn is actually a lock at overall number one. Not necessarily that they'll stay overall one as a lock, but I think there's literally nothing they can do at this point to not be a number one seed. I know a lot of people have speculated maybe if they win one or two more games, they'll be a lock. And I actually don't see it. Like, I think their resume is so good. There's literally nothing they can do to fall off that line. So I think Auburn's going to be a number one seed. Beyond that, I have moved Duke ahead of Alabama following Alabama's loss to Missouri. And now I have Florida remaining as my final number one seed. But I think Houston and Tennessee are right there in the picture as well.
Yep. So we don't differ. I also moved Duke back up to number two overall. It's crazy. Auburn has more quad 1A wins than any other team has quad one wins, which is just not fair. I agree they could probably go 0 and 6 the rest of the way and still be a one seed. Certainly none of those losses would be bad. They would then have eight total losses, then that would become a bit of a question, but also somebody would actually have to pass them by winning enough quality games. So I think they're just about locked into a one seed, and it does feel like they're just about locked into number one overall. And then yeah, Duke, Alabama, Florida. I think if Houston beats Iowa State and Texas Tech, they vault to the top of that group. I think Houston would then be number two overall, and I have them at six right now. So there's that little bit of separation between really the back end of the one line, the top of the two line. But pulling at that thread a little bit more, I'll let you go first. Who do you think is the furthest down your seed list that you could still see getting a one seed?
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of teams that could potentially do it, but I want to focus on the ones that like realistically I could see do it. And I think Iowa State is that team for me. Right now they're a three seed for me, the top three seed. But if they go to Houston and pick up a victory this weekend, all of a sudden all sorts of things are on the table for the Cyclones. So if you look at Iowa State, they are still six excuse me, let me look down at that, make sure I'm looking at the right one. I think I saw Kentucky for a second. There we go. 6-4 versus quad one, 7-0 against quad two. I think that's a really good start. If they were then to be 7-4 with that Houston win, and that's an elite road win, I think that's a really good mark. Do I think they could get away with the loss to Kansas State? Yeah, that was one bad loss. Obviously, Iowa State's had injury concerns like many teams around the country. I do think that would come up in the committee room if Iowa State's in the picture. So realistically, I think the Cyclones could be the furthest team down to make a run for the one seed nine.
I would go further than that. I absolutely agree Iowa State could get there, and I do think that the injury would come up there as much as we've said over the last 2 months that like whatever, you got to win your games. It's very clear that Iowa State was a different team without Milan Momcilovic. They were a tip in against Auburn on a neutral floor away from being undefeated when he's in the lineup. Yeah, I think they could absolutely get back in the mix. The furthest down I would go, and I almost have to scroll to do it, St. John's. If St. John's wins out and you have a 30-4 Big East sweep champion, I think they get a 1 seed. Even though they're only 1-1 against quad 1A, like they don't have those marquee wins. I think St. John's could get really interesting in a hurry, but really only because of the lack of losses and the fact that they would be a double champ. But I think that's a stretch. They would still have to win, I believe, at Marquette. I think they still have a home game against Connecticut, or maybe I have those backwards. Um, but they would have to win the Big East tournament as well, although that's at home for them, Madison Square Garden. So yeah, versus Connecticut on Sunday, finish the season at Marquette, then they would have to win the Big East tournament. But I think if they can pull that off, like they're certainly going to edge out the third best SEC team, probably even the second best SEC team if Auburn sweeps both the regular season and conference tournament titles. Then it's really just a question of whether they can get ahead of Duke and or Houston on that top line. But I think that's a stretch. I have St. John's, I believe, at 15 or 16. I can't see anybody below that making even a remotely realistic case for it. I would say in between Iowa State and St. John's, I still think Kentucky, with the sheer volume of quality wins they have, if they were to win the SEC tournament, I think they'd have a strong case. And Michigan, similar to St. John's, where if you have a two-loss Big Ten champion, that's going to be really hard to deny a spot on the top line. But I think all three of those teams need help in order to get up there. I don't think they control their own destiny by any means.
You know
Texas
what?
A&M,
I
are
might
they?
disagree with you on Iowa State. I think because Iowa State, what they could do is knock off Houston in Houston and then controlling their own destiny. If they win the Big 12 tournament title too, to add on to that, I think Iowa State would bump past Houston at that point. So they
Yeah,
don't have to worry about another Big 12 team. And then I think just through sheer numbers of games the SEC teams are playing each other, those teams are going to take enough losses. I think Iowa State really kind of does control their own destiny at this point. That said, they're probably not going to win tomorrow, let alone win out
yeah.
through the Big 12 tournament final.
No, I agree. I think Iowa State does. I have Iowa State at 7. I meant Kentucky, Michigan, and St. John's. They're going to
Ah,
need help. But
there you go.
yeah, I agree. If Iowa State wins out, they are absolutely going to be a 1 seed, even without the Momcilovic injury discussion. I think their profile will be that strong. What was I saying? Texas A&M. Are they done for 1 seed purposes? Like I feel like they're the highest seeded team that really doesn't have a case anymore.
Well, I think when they've got those they have 4 wins against the net top 25 away from College Station. And so
That's pretty good.
because that's such a strong number, I think they could still get there. The reality is if they're going to do it, they absolutely have to beat Tennessee tomorrow. But then they go to Florida, home against Auburn. They probably need to win 2 of those 3 and beat Vanderbilt and LSU to have a realistic chance. And they might need to win all 3. So, kind of easier said than done. I don't know that beating Tennessee and Auburn at home would even be enough. I think they'd probably have to win the Florida road game as that combination of 2 of 3 because, winning home games is great and beating Tennessee and Auburn is great. But we're talking about a team that has predictive metrics that are really atypical for a 1 seed. So I think they'd have to
Yeah.
be utterly convincing to be on that one line.
Yeah. I mean, if they were to beat Tennessee like Florida beat Tennessee earlier this season, that's one thing. Because, like you're saying, the predictives is the problem. They were already like 10th before the loss to Mississippi State. Now 16, 17, 18, 20. Yeah, that's gotten pretty ugly in a hurry. But they are still my number 8 overall seed. Uh, but I find it hard to believe they can sneak up there, even though they have, as we just pointed out, games against Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn. Like they could get those by proxy, knock those teams out, but we'll see if they can get there. Switching gears entirely to teams where home wins over Tennessee and Auburn wouldn't quite put them over the top to teams who are just looking for a win over Clemson to prove that they belong in the field. Let's go down to the bubble. Current last 4 in, first 4 out, although I think it's more of a last 6 in and first 4 out right now because that entire 11 seed line makes me want to vomit, man. Where are you at 41 through 46?
Well, actually, 41, I have an automatic qualifier there. I have the Drake Bulldogs coming in at 41, and then
All right, who do you have
42.
at? Who's your 40 then? Like, who's your last six at larges? Don't be an idiot.
So I think I have Texas there as my
Oh,
last.
okay.
So I have Texas, my last 10 seed, coming in at 40, 41 Drake, 42 Wake Forest. And then I kind of actually start, for the purposes of the bracket, I start mixing up seeds a little bit because we have two SEC teams there, so they can't play each other in the first four game. So I have Vanderbilt, then Oklahoma, then VCU, and then Ohio State, rounding out the final team in the field right now.
You and I have kind of gone the opposite direction. I still have Ohio State at 41, but I've dropped Nebraska to 45 after that loss to Penn State a couple nights ago. I was already iffy on the Cornhuskers. I think that really hurt them. But otherwise, we're pretty similar. I have Wake Forest 42, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, then Nebraska and VCU is my last team in. I hope VCU gets in. That would be awesome to get a two bid A10 given how god awful the bubble is this year. But yeah, I think the that Big Ten bubble has gotten really iffy. If you have Ohio State that low, let's dive into that resume because I was looking at them earlier today. I forget what the numbers were from my tweet. I could probably actually pull them up because I put them in a spreadsheet. So let me share this pathetic little chart that I made. But
Well, I
you
mean,
can zoom
let's
in on.
start with the fact that Ohio State is 9-12 against the first three quadrants. That is
That's not
not
great.
that is not good. What's keeping Ohio State in for me is obviously just the really fantastic wins. The Kentucky game in particular, they were incredibly impressive there. Going to Purdue, winning in Mackey Arena, that was a gigantic victory for Ohio State. So I think there's a couple of wins that really stand out for them, and that's why they're still in for me. But yeah, again, it just comes down to they haven't been good enough against Quad 2 in particular. They're playing against Quad 2, like a team that you would expect maybe to be like net 100 or something, would probably have that kind of record against Quad 2. And what they're doing there just isn't good enough to be in the tournament. The fact that they have such great wins is keeping them there for me. But I think Ohio State suddenly, because of this Northwestern loss, is on the bubble. I really thought they were in good shape. They just needed to not get blown out at home by Northwestern. And all of a sudden, even with this bubble, that's a really, really bad result. So still good enough to be in because of the state of the bubble, but barely for me.
Yeah, asking them to not get blown out at home by a Northwestern team that feels like every 5 days they're losing another player for the season to an injury. Like you can't lose that game at this point. That is pretty unforgivable. But yeah, just this I just keep coming back to Ohio State versus SMU, right? Because they are. I mean, it's not exactly the last team in, first team out, but they're basically neck and neck at this point, and they could not have more divergent profiles. It's just Ohio State has taken too many losses because they've played 12 more games against the net top 75 than SMU did. Like it's one of those things where I know this isn't really a talking point, but if SMU had played Ohio State's schedule, what would their record be? And if it's just crazy that those teams are so close together in, not only on the seed list, but the all the metrics too. Let me switch back to the bubble. Where is it? Here we go. Share. There we go. So Ohio State and where is SMU? Oh, right there. So very similar nets, almost the same resume metrics, almost the same quality metrics, but just wildly different quad one records and all that business. So it's great because SMU is 10-0 against quad three. That's what's keeping them in it. It's disgusting. And ACC teams should not be ever talking about their quad three record unless it's to point out losses.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is SMU's going to be treated a bit like a mid-major by the committee this year because the ACC has been so bad. And they're going to have to look at SMU and say, yeah, they had limited chances against quad one. So how do we judge a team with limited chances against quad one? That's what they usually do with mid-majors. That's the analysis they do. I think SMU is out until and unless they pick up that win against Clemson. Because I just think you look at what they've done. It's not just that they're 0-4. It's that they're just getting beaten badly every time they have an opportunity. They haven't looked like they can play with NCAA tournament teams. They look incredibly good when they're not playing NCAA tournament level competition, but when they do, they just haven't shown up. And I think the committee, it's almost an obligation to punish them for that, because it's
Yeah.
not fair to all the other teams in the country that do play NCAA tournament level teams and win those games. If you're going to let SMU get a pass, it's just not fair to everybody else.
I think it was our boy JBR who pointed out that they have not and will not play a single game away from home against an NCAA tournament team, right? They played, I think there's one more somewhere that I'm missing. Who else did they play? Mississippi State, Duke, Louisville. Oh, Wake Forest, who we now have in. So that's, and including the game against Clemson on Saturday. That's 5 home games, and that's all they've played against the field. And they lost them all at home. I mean, the opportunities aren't there, but they also have blown the few opportunities they did have. So even with all that, SMU is my second team out, and I hate it. But you have to have them in there because the metrics mandate it. So I believe we have the exact same first four out. I have TCU, who has just catapulted in out of nowhere. SMU, where's my list? Indiana and Arkansas slash Georgia. I'm not sure which one I prefer as fourth team out, but they're both right there with way too many conference losses, although somehow Oklahoma's still in. I guess they went 13-0 in non-conference, and Arkansas and Georgia did not do that. That's the big difference.
Yeah, I'm really in the same boat. So I go first four out: TCU, SMU, Indiana, just like you. And then Georgia is my fourth team out. Right behind that, I have North Carolina and Arkansas. I do think the Tar Heels just continue to linger a little bit. When you have a
Yeah.
bubble this bad, all they need is that one win over Duke, and that could be enough to launch them into the field. So, as disappointing of a season as this has been for North Carolina, and let's look at it: 6-10 against quads 1 and 2, a loss outside of the top two quads, 1-10 against quad 1, still might be good enough. This is a bad bubble. If they beat Duke, that's a marquee win that teams just don't have this year.
Yeah. No, that would be huge. And I mean, they're top 50 in every metric. I guess KPI has them 53, but if they get to top 50, right, if they get that win over Duke, they certainly would be there in KPI. Um, that's usually good enough. If you're there, you're probably going to get in. And I mean, especially this year, now that we have extra metrics, like that's more reinforcement that they are actually a top 50 team worthy of consideration. So yeah, we talked about it probably the last pod, probably the pod before that too, but they have to beat Duke or they're not getting in. And even then, it's still questionable, especially if they drop another one somewhere along the way before like the ACC semis or something. But yeah, I mean, North Carolina's certainly still on my board, just not quite first four out. All right, next subject. What did you mean when you said most interesting part of your bracket?
Well, I think that we're seeing, at least to me, a kind of interesting year. And in particular, I just think there's a lot of bunching up in various parts of the bracket that we're not used to seeing. We're used to seeing a little bit more stratification as we go, stratification, excuse me, as we go through the, what is that, WWE? Did I throw that
What
out
a
there?
big word. Trish Stratus? What?
Yeah. But a little stratification amongst the seed lines. We're used to seeing that a little bit more. And I just don't think we're seeing it as much this year. For example, 21 to 29 on my overall seed list, which is basically my whole 6 seed line, my whole 7 seed line, and then my top 8 seed, are almost interchangeable at this point. I see all of those teams. I look at their profiles and I think every single one of those teams should be a 6 seed, but there's just not space for it. And
Yeah.
today I had some Memphis fans that were pretty upset because they happened to fall on 29 overall, even though I think this
Wow.
team should get a 6 seed. They got my top 8 seed. And it's not really making sense that we're having this kind of season where you have a ton of teams all seemingly belonging on a seed line they can't get to. For example, I have Texas Tech as my top 5 seed. I don't think they should be a 5 seed. think they should be better than that. I just can't find enough spots. And I think what we're seeing is a really, really weak bubble. And as a result, those teams not winning some of those games has gotten given wins to other teams further up the bracket. So now we're just seeing a bunch of profiles that really should be better than they are. And in a different year, they would be higher up the bracket than they are. There's too much competition. I think in particular, trying to figure out how to handle the 6 and 7 seeds has been a real chore for me.
Yeah, I do think the six seeds are really strong. I agree with you. That was one of the things I was going to say is not only is the bubble just that bad, like I can't possibly fathom right now picking an 11 seed to beat a six seed in the first round. And that's usually like we're guaranteed to get two of those every year. But like there's that much of a separation between, 21 and 41 right now. But for me, the most interesting part is the 8-9 lines. Man, you're going to end up with like UConn, Baylor, Gonzaga. I don't even know how to put them in the bracket because Baylor played Gonzaga, Connecticut played Gonzaga, Baylor played UConn. Like I'm getting all these problems, but then you got Louisville, Creighton, Oregon, they're all in there as well. The conspiracy theorists will say, well, of course, Duke is going to get, West Virginia, Utah State as their 8-9, and the other one seeds will all get hammered with these, title contenders. But my God, it's going to be tempting to pick almost every 8-9 winner over every non-Auburn one seed this year because that 28 through 30 or 28 through 35 range is super duper strong right now. Um, where are you ending up with like I assume we have similar 8 and 9 seeds. Where are you with aside from Auburn? Like, are you going to pick UConn over Florida? Like,
I mean, I think you're right. I think it's probably going to be one of the most interesting. We'll see how it goes, right? We still have a couple more weeks
yeah,
before
for
we
sure.
finish the season, so there could still be some more movement. But seeing the 8s and 9s that we have right now, yeah, I have Memphis, who I just said should be a 6 seed. They're not a 6 seed for me. Somebody had to be an 8 seed. We've seen what Memphis can do when they play top tier competition. They keep playing to their level of competition. If they play up again, that could be a really interesting game. I also have UConn there, like you mentioned. I have Creighton there. Creighton's played really, really well at times this season as well. So that's a very dangerous 8 seed. And my final one is Gonzaga, who obviously is fantastic. That's not even including the 9 seeds, right? Like we could have Baylor, New Mexico, Utah State. Those are some fun 9 seeds too. But in particular, I think the 8 line is by far the strongest 8 line I've ever seen. These teams that are on the 8 line could absolutely be 5 seeds if just one or two results went differently.
Yeah, Creighton is like a very slightly poor man's Purdue, right? Instead of Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn, it's Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner. Instead of Fletcher Lawyer, it's Jackson McAndrew. And then you don't know really what else they have. They pull off some incredible wins. Sometimes they just don't look right because they basically are a three-man team. But that, man, if they get in, and I've said plenty of negative shit about Creighton all season long. I feel like I should talk them up a little bit, but that is a dangerous team, man. If that's an 8 seed, that's crazy this year.
Yeah, I think what in particular catches my attention about the 8 line is not just the expectations coming into the year. All of those teams were expected to have monster years. So we know they have the talent, we know they have the roster, and really, frankly, they all have the coaching to go with it as well. But they're high variance teams. At times, they've all played like gangbusters this year. And then they've also all struggled. So if you're a 1 seed, that's the last thing you want to see. You want to see a team who's been consistently the 32nd best team in the
Yeah.
country. That's exactly who you want to see. You don't
You
want to see
you
a
want to
team that,
face Clemson. You want that team.
yeah, you do not want to play the team who plays like a number 1 seed sometimes and plays like an NIT team at other times. That's exactly the team you don't want to draw.
So this is what is Torvik pulls. That's just what the bracket matrix says. Yeah, matrix seed. So the eights right now, Baylor, Oregon, Connecticut, Creighton, all of whom have at times felt like a national championship caliber team. So yeah, that'll be not fun. Picking, frankly, the 8-9 games to begin with, and then picking those second round games too.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
Let's look at
Yep.
Oregon really quick, just for an example of how strong some of these seeds
Yeah.
are right now. You look at their 8-6 against Quad One, and they have 4 wins against Quad 1A. And in particular, some of those wins really stand out. Texas A&M on a neutral court, Alabama on a neutral court. They beat Maryland, won at Ohio State, beat Purdue. That's the sort of resume that typically you're looking at that team for like a 2 or a 3 seed with those kinds of. I was struggling today. Like, can I move them to a 7 seed or do they have to stay an 8? Like, that's how strong some of these profiles are. We're not used to seeing that. So it's just a bad year to be a 1 seed or a 2 seed because you could really draw very, very strong 7 and 8 seeds.
And with Oregon in particular, right? You pointed out they're 8-6 against Quad One, but we've been doing this all season. We remember when they were 8-2 against Quad One. Like, there was a time where they were like our number 5 overall seed, and now here we are talking about them as a team slipping to the bubble. Don't think they've got the games left where they possibly could fall that much further. If they,
Yeah.
I mean, they'll probably
I mean,
lose
the
at
reality is
Wisconsin, but if they were to drop those games, yikes.
the bubble is so bad that there's
Yeah,
no
there's no way
way
Oregon's dropping out.
they're not falling out.
And then we wanted to discuss games for this weekend that matter the most. I don't know which way you want to roll with it. I jotted down like 12, so you could go first, and I'll pick a few others.
Well, I'll just go with the number one game to me on my mind is Texas A&M Tennessee, because not only does it have 1 seed implications, it's going to affect things down the bracket. What I mean by that is the placement those teams end up with,
Hmm.
whether it's on the 2 line, the 3 line, it's going to move regions for other teams. So I think that's in sub-regional sites as well, where the first and second round games are going to be played will depend on the result here potentially. So I think that's the most important game for tomorrow is Texas A&M Tennessee, because Tennessee I think really kind of needs this one if they want to get a 1 seed, and I think Texas A&M could potentially still make a run for a 1 seed, but it's more so about them protecting a 2 seed at this point.
Yeah, so we got that one. We got Iowa State at Houston, and then on Monday, Houston, Texas Tech. We got the Illinois Duke game at the Garden. We got Kentucky at Alabama. Like, if Kentucky beats Alabama, if Illinois beats Duke, the winners of the Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Iowa State Houston game might be 1 seeds on Monday. I don't know. There's a lot going on at the top of the bracket. A lot that could still shake out. I think the big ones are down on the bubble, right? George Mason at VCU, absolutely massive. I think the winner of that one has a very strong case to not only be in the field right now, but ultimately end the year as an at-large team, even if they don't win the A10 tournament. We've already harped on SMU. This is their last chance. They got to win that home game against Clemson, or else they're not getting in. God, I hope. And then everything in the SEC, where I mean, we already talked about a couple of the big games in the SEC, but Arkansas at home against Missouri, Vanderbilt at home against Ole Miss, Oklahoma at home against Mississippi State. Got to win those home games if you're on the bubble. So I think we could have a lot shaken out there. And then one more off the beaten path. I don't think you're prepared to talk about this team, but Akron at Ohio. If Akron goes undefeated in the regular season, but then loses in the MAC championship, maybe, possibly, even though they don't have the metrics for it. What do you think?
You're making me think I need to take a look at another Akron's profile again.
They're
I
not
have Akron
metrics
as a
wise,
13
they're not close.
right
I'll pull
now,
it up.
so yeah, let's pull it up. I have Akron as a 13 seed, and I feel pretty good about it currently. That said, I'm still not seeing it, Kerry, but we'll
Let me
have
go
to
back.
take a look at their upcoming schedule. But you just look at those metrics.
No, yeah, the metrics are terrible. But
I don't know how they could get into that at large positioning, considering they're 1-3 against quads 1 and 2 right now. So,
I'm
um,
just like constantly looking for anybody that could possibly be in the conversation because there are
yeah,
so many teams that I don't want in.
I saw somebody not quoted me, but replied to a tweet I had with talking about Liberty as an at large. And I think that's just the state of the
Yeah,
bubble right now.
yeah.
Anybody with any possible claim whatsoever is now they're looking for it. And you can almost see it like 3-2 against quads 1 and 2. Like in this kind of bubble, it's do I think Liberty has a chance at an enlarge? No, I don't. But you can kind of start to see where people are coming from because the bubble has been that horrendous that anything that they could possibly latch onto, they are.
This is all you have to do. Just sort by resume average and then go down into this like 50 to 60 range. Just like, oh man, Cincinnati, if they just win a game, they're close. They're 1-9. Like that's
You
all it
know,
takes.
legitimately, I keep looking at Cincinnati. Had they won that West Virginia game, all of a sudden
Yeah.
they could have potentially even vaulted into the field. But I don't think they're necessarily done either. And it's kind of crazy to think about because you look at their quad one record, they're 1-9 against quad one. But again, all it takes is one or two victories, and they'll all of a sudden be looking like a possibly attractive option for a bid.
Yeah. UC Irvine dead.
I think UC Irvine, I'm classifying them as a team that's on the bubble, but they're not going to get in. What I mean by that is in this kind of bubble, you can't say no for
Yeah.
sure at this point. But the reality is they haven't done enough to get in. I think if there's a team from the Big West that gets in, it's going to be UC San Diego, not just because of the win over Irvine, but they won at Utah State. And that is the kind of result that could really catch the selection committee's attention. So San Diego, UC San Diego is the team on my radar right now.
Yeah. I think for a while, I would have to look back at, some bracket data I pulled like 2, 3 weeks ago, but Irvine was like 20 points ahead of San Diego in the resume metrics. Like it was like 40 to 62 or something like that. Now they're both right there in that 50s range where, I mean, if UC San Diego does lose to anyone other than Irvine, they have no chance. Like that is the only scenario now, I think, is if they both win out until the championship and Irvine beats UC San Diego.
Yeah, and I think that's a part people need to remember of all of this is and why a lot of mid majors, when we're evaluating this, it seems a little unfair late in the season. Part of that is if a mid major is going to need is going to need an at large bid, they have to have lost to another mid conference tournament. Whereas for a lot of these high majors, okay, so you lost to Tennessee or Duke or whatever. That's not going to cost you a bid losing that game in your conference tournament. But for, as Kerry mentioned, for UC San Diego, if it's anybody but Irvine, that's a loss that's really going to hurt the resume. So that's a part that I think people tend to forget with a lot of the mid majors is, hey, they might be number 50 in wins above bubble right now, but if they
Yeah.
take one more loss, that's going to be a real hit to that resume.
Oh, that's wins above bubble is exactly what I was going to point to, right? If UC San Diego wins their next five, they get 0.06, 0.35, 0.01, 0.02, 0.1. That's zero point 0.6 of a win above bubble. That would bring their zero point 0.4 up to 1 win above bubble. Whereas, like any of those teams I mentioned from the SEC, right? If Arkansas wins at home against Missouri, that's probably like a 0.45 or something. Right there, they would get as much as UC San Diego is going to gain the rest of the season. So, yeah,
Well, and then they
it's
lose
always a
it, right?
tightrope walk.
You see
What's that?
UC Riverside there. When they lost at UC Riverside, they lost zero point 0.7 wins above bubble. So if they lose that game on a neutral court in the Big West tournament, all of a sudden they're really hurting.
Yeah. All right, that's enough bubble talk. We're running out of time anyway. Maybe we should try and watch some games together this weekend. I don't know. Oh no, I'm going to taking the wife and the kid to old Great Wolf Lodge. You go to Disney, I'm going to Great. We got to get this stuff in before the tournament starts, man, because we're not going to see our family for an entire month.
That's just good planning.
All right, man. We'll talk soon. Go Clemson. Please kill SMU for us. Take care. Oh no, don't take care. I got to stop share first. I got to say take care again. See ya.